I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin of the New York Times and also of CNBC, and thrilled to be here with Jeff. We're going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes and then try to throw it open to the audience talking about the future of air travel. And as I imagine, there's going to be a lot of questions in the audience since we all fly and have flown here, many of us on United. And I thought I'd start by sort of narrating very briefly my own experience getting here because I did it on United. And then maybe you could comment on
Boy, I hope it was a good experience.
I got here on time. That's the good news. So just so we have a baseline, I got to LaGuardia about an hour and a half in advance. I spent about 20 minutes online for security, even though I had pre-check and global entry. I got on the flight, did okay. I saw your pretty face on the video. That was a good experience. But then was admonished by the flight attendant about using my telephone because I was using it too long. Got to Denver, had to haul like a good mile. I feel like I had to walk with a bag.
That's why they call it the Mile High City.
Then I took a little United Express plane, which I don't think is owned by United, but is part of a code share with you. They told us we might have some issues on the way in because you got a bank, you know the landing. And then I did get here on time. So it wasn't a bad experience all in all, but it was long. I was in coach. I was a little cramped. Flight was not cheap. $776 was the plane ticket. What is that flight? What is that experience that I just had and that I imagine many people in this audience also had going to be like 20 years from now, but also take it farther. Take it 50 years out from now.
Well, I think 20 years from now, the equipment you'd be on, let's start with the equipment, will be pretty much locked and loaded by the airframe and engine manufacturers. That is, if you think of what we at United have today and what we're buying the 737 MAX, which is the more fuel-efficient narrow body. We have 150 of those, or 100 of them coming in, 150 narrow bodies on order. In terms of the experience, you'll have much better communication throughout, not only before you travel, but at the airport and during travel, because we're going to be, we at United and all the airlines, I think, will be spending a lot of time and attention on technology and the ability to put more control of the entire experience in the customer's hands. If there's an issue, not only reaccommodating you, but letting you also make a choice of your own reaccommodation without having to stand in some long line. Making sure we can communicate with you on the aircraft. We're putting, for example, satellite-based Wi-Fi on all of our mainline fleet and some of our larger regional fleet. I think that the engines will be more fuel efficient than they are today. Those aircraft flying around will probably have between 15 and 20% more fuel efficiency. I think that, so I think 20 years from now, there'll be more in the way of technology and and control of the travel experience by the customer.
But basic experience.
But I think the basic experience won't be dramatically different 20 years today in terms of the equipment or the speed of the flight than it is today, because most of the aircraft that will be delivered in the, say, 2018 to 2020 timeframe will still be in service 20 years from now.
So then take us 50 years out, because I'm hoping you're going to say to me that I'm going to be able, 50 years from now, to show up at the airport a half hour in advance, get a direct flight to Aspen. The flight it'll be cheaper. They'll give me a pillow. The seats will be better. Is there a future that looks like that?
The great thing about projecting 50 years out is I can't be held accountable because I won't be around. So I'll tell you what I do think. I think that there will be, and there have the prospect of some pretty significant advances in the travel technology itself. I know that both Boeing and Airbus and others are working on pretty materially different airframes, some of which will look very different than what you fly today. I mean, I know Boeing's worked on a concept of a flying wing, which would be like flying in an amphitheater, which would be a very efficient airframe design. Wouldn't have windows in the interior, but I mean, you could have artificial windows. You could have screens that let you look outside even though you're not sitting next door. And it could be a very large and comfortable space. Now, recognize that people envision aircraft having, showers and lounges and workout facilities and all these fantasies. The problem is someone has to pay for that. And real estate on board an airplane is really expensive. And people often say, gee, your seats are getting narrower in coach. It's not true. It's not true. Now, Americans' behinds are getting a little wider, perhaps, but the seats are not narrow. But you have to pay for that real estate. And so there are all kinds of ideas of seats that could gather the energy, the warmth of the human body and translate it into energy on board the airplane. There's all kinds of interesting ideas. I mean, potentially you could have aircraft that had assisted takeoff. You could imagine an electromagnetic railgun, which would assist in the takeoff of the airplane, which would permit you to have both a lighter airframe and lighter engines, because a lot of the energy of an aircraft is used in takeoff, right? You could imagine, the military has short takeoff and landing and vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, like the Harrier jet, for example. If that technology could, in a fuel-efficient form, be put on an airframe, you could imagine a scenario for Aspen of an aircraft that could service. Let's take a city that has an airport that's close to downtown, an airport further away. Well, if you had aircraft that could land and take off in short distances or even vertically, it would dramatically change our need for infrastructure for runways, right? You could also imagine an aircraft dropping people off in one airport and then lifting off and dropping people off at another airport. Right. So there's a lot of things that could change dramatically 50 years, based really on the technology of the airframe, the technology of the engines, and the cost.
Realistically, in the grand debate right now between energy, fuel, and fuel efficiency and speed, it seems that the argument for energy efficiency is winning by a long shot. Do you see that changing? Do you see their ability to actually gain? I mean, I think some of us are surprised that in an age where we used to have something called the Concorde, we're actually now creating planes that actually go slower.
Well, it is. It's the trade-off in the energy efficiency and the speed. And really, what airlines do is react to customer demand. And at one point, Boeing, and I want to be talking about Boeing. By the way, I love Airbus as well. We have 35 Airbus airplanes, wide bodies on order as well, and we fly a lot of Airbus airplanes. Boeing looked before the 787 at an aircraft that was not supersonic, but closer to the speed of sound than the current aircraft are. And that aircraft, though, burned more fuel. And in a world of $120 barrel or $130 barrel jet fuel, customers would like the speed, but they won't pay for it. And so what we do, we just respond to demand. There is a thin, ethereal audience of customers who would pay for supersonic travel. But whether that number of people are sufficient in an era of very high fuel prices to be able to generate sufficient demand so that airlines could be profitable operating those aircraft types, and there'd be enough demand for the airframe and the engine manufacturer to be responsive and build those aircraft. I think that's a pretty open question. I don't believe the Concorde ever made any money in its history, and that was at much lower fuel prices.
Help us, forget about the next 20 or 50 years, but help us even over the next 10 years. We've had a number of mergers in the airline business, which has created a lot of consolidation. It's been great for your stock and the other stocks of the airlines. But there is a worry, a persistent worry, and I think it's probably coming true if you look at some of the numbers, that prices are going up. Where do you see prices going up? How much do you see prices going up? And also, and I think it's important actually for a town like Aspen and so many smaller towns, what kind of coverage are they going to have ultimately in a world where we have so much consolidation in the business?
Well, let me start with consolidation, because our business in the U.S. has been characterized by far too many business plans chasing far too few passengers, and as a result, we priced our product below cost and tried to make it up on volume, and that doesn't work very well. And consolidation has been healthy because it's permitted us to have the right level of capacity for the right level of demand, generating returns for us in excess of our cost of capital, so we can do all the things you want, which is invest in these very expensive airplanes, invest in technology, make your travel more efficient, invest in customer service training as we are at United. All the things that you want us to do, and you want us to be successful, so we need to be profitable. Air travel today, at the pricing today, is still just an incredible bargain. And in real terms, is still lower in price than it was in regulated times. So, I can't talk about the future of prices because my lawyers spank me if I do that. But I will tell you that we need to earn a return, in excess of our cost of capital. We need to be able to continue to invest in our business. And historically, airlines have been experts at one thing, which is destroying people's capital since the Wright brothers. And we are finally in a position to be able to generate positive returns and not only be profitable, but use that money and reinvest in the business and ultimately do what we're paid to do, which is return cash to our shareholders. And having an airline CEO talk about or do in the future, returning cash to shareholders is unheard of practically in this business because we weren't a business. We were an airline, but we weren't a business. So, directionally, I think that we need to be in a position where we can make money. Now, in terms of service to small cities,
well, because there's a public role of airlines. No. In addition to serving the shareholders, there is a larger role in some sense around the global economy. And,
of course,
and transporting people. And so, when you think about smaller economies, actually smaller towns, how do you think about that issue?
Well, those again, that's largely a function of demand, and now with higher fuel prices. It makes it more difficult, even with higher fuel prices, we have been, we have been able to raise our fares to at least recover a portion of the higher fuel prices. But there's always a trade-off between the fuel prices and the efficiency of the aircraft and the demand in the local market. Most small markets want big airplanes, which the demand isn't sufficient to generate to be generated for the large airplanes, and so that's why we fly small airplanes in towns like Aspen.
Well, what do you think of the role of government, the role of local governments in subsidizing airlines? And the reason I ask is I'm thinking about Bozeman, Montana. You guys fly into Bozeman. Part of the reason you fly is because Bozeman has subsidized that flight because they want people to come and they want people to ski. I assume they're hoping they're going to build such demand in that town for skiing that ultimately they don't need to subsidize the plane. How do you think about that issue?
Well, from time to time, local businesses will subsidize service, particularly in ski destinations, and that's fairly common. In terms of government subsidies, I'm strongly opposed to government subsidies. I think that's distortive. I think that the air service needs to be supported by the demand and the economic the economic activities of the particular location and the traffic that generates, because governments tend to terribly distort business. You just see that today in the Gulf carriers and the Middle East carriers, with massive amounts of state subsidy and state ownership, doing enormous damage to the airlines in Europe and in Asia. In a way that if there were
Lufthansa's of the world, the Deltas, not the Deltas,
Air France-KLM's, British Airways, Iberia, some of the Asian carriers as well, Singapore's, other.
How much do you think that the Middle Eastern carriers right now are losing to subsidize that?
Well, there's no way of knowing because there's no transparency in the numbers. But Etihad, there's a joke in our industry. James Hogan runs Etihad that they gave him an unlimited budget and he exceeded it because when they need more money, they just take the valve and squeak, and more oil comes out. And it's very hard for us as U.S. carriers to compete effectively against a carrier with low levels of taxation. We're 20% of our tickets get scraped off of our revenue before we get a penny of revenue at the airline, and we have burdensome regulation, and we have a very old, safe but old air traffic control system in the United States, and the Gulf carriers have none of that. In fact, they have a very supportive government, and in many ways, unfortunately, a very subsidized operation.
Right. I want to get to some of the new generation traffic control issues in a second, but because we're on the international issue, it's worth talking about. Do you think ultimately, right now, a foreign carrier can't buy United, and frankly, you can't buy a foreign carrier? Given the subsidies that you just talked about, some of the regulations we have here and the regulations in other countries, if you could snap your fingers and change the world, what would it look like in terms of globally for airline consolidation? What would be allowed, what wouldn't be allowed?
Well, I think starting in the U.S. first, I think that the level of taxation, there's appropriate levels of taxation of U.S. airlines for us to pay for the air traffic control system that we use. There's no question about that. But subjecting us to 17 different taxes and fees, $19 billion of taxes, with the current administration proposing not only your tickets being taxed at 20%, but now 25%. Which is another $5.5 billion, which is more than the entire U.S. airline industry made last year, by the way. That's absurd. The regulatory burden, regulations that are safety related are perfectly acceptable as long as they're science-based, but regulations that purport to be in the consumer benefit, but the costs far exceed the consumer benefit.
Like?
Well, for example, the long-term delay rules, where we're trapped often by weather, or we're trapped by our own government, and theoretically we're subject to a $27,500 per person fine. Last time I checked, we don't ever charge that for a ticket. I wish we could, but we don't. And obviously modernizing the air traffic control system. Those three things, plus we have to find some more level playing field when it comes to how we can compete against state-sponsored and state-owned other airlines.
Would you want to own a foreign carrier, or would you want a foreign carrier to be allowed to own you?
Well, you know, I think that depends. I think that there's enormous resistance to changes in laws on foreign ownership and control. And so if I think of how I'd like to spend my time trying to change the structure of the U.S. airline industry, that's one I don't really want to spend a lot of time on, because I think that politically that has very little support. Now, from a theoretical basis, free flows of capital across borders, having restrictions on cross-border ownership are odd from if you're just a pure economist perspective, but also deal in the world of realpolitik.
Okay. Let's get into traffic and control, but you did remind me to ask you one question I was going to ask you in the very beginning, and I hope you can answer it semi-honestly. Wait, no. No.
Andrew, I've been answering all your questions honestly.
But this is a hard. No, this one's truly hard. When I use my cell phone on the plane, is it really create a problem? You guys have now internet on the plane, so I don't really understand.
We obey the law. And let me say that our flight attendant says, the flight attendant asks you to turn your device off. You know, he or she is subject.
She was snappy about it.
He or she can be subject to a fine personally for that. And so we must obey the law. Now, realistically, if someone left a cell phone on for a flight that was taking off or was below 10,000 feet, and that actually caused a problem, we'd have airplanes falling out of the sky every day, right? I mean, we all know that. And I know that the FAA is looking at revising those rules, and I hope they do so. However, there's a plethora of devices, and they have different, electromagnetic signatures, and they have to sort through all that. But I think there'll be some reform of that. Now, with Wi-Fi, like we're putting satellite-based Wi-Fi in our entire fleet, so you can run, but you can't hide anymore. There will be issues, for example, with VoIP, because you could be stuck next to someone who's arguing with his or her girlfriend or boyfriend for 4 hours.
Yeah, what's that going to be like?
Well, we're going to actively discourage people from doing that, and we're going to basically have an on-board rule that you can't do that.
So you can't. So you will have internet. You will be able to Skype technically, but you can't really Skype.
The same flight attendant asks you to turn your cell phone off will also tell you please to stop Skyping, because the passenger next to you is getting really annoyed, or that passenger next to you may just reach over and break your machine. I don't know.
It's going to create some interesting issues in the air. Let's talk about NextGen traffic control. Right now, it's a mess up there in the skies. There is several proposals, one in general, to revolutionize effectively the maps in which these planes go in, bringing GPS and other sort of new technology, which isn't so new, into the game. Where do you think that really stands right now? When do you think we really will see development, and what will it mean to everybody in this room in a real way?
Well, it's a long process, and it's an expensive process, but it's a process that's well worth undertaking, and our government is making some degree of progress. Not as rapid as all of us in this room, including me, particularly would like, but excuse me, but we are making some progress. It is important because we rely today on the very finest World War II ground-based radar technology, and you actually have better wayfinding on your Hondas, or in this audience, your Bentleys, than the government uses. But we will progress that, and the FAA will progress that. And
is that 5 years out? Is that 10 years out?
Well, I think it's not 5 years out. It's not 20 years out. It's somewhere in between. The aircraft that we have at United and most aircraft have the right equipage, and it could save a considerable amount of time, a considerable amount of fuel burn. I mean, you could save 10% on the fuel burn, which is a lot.
Because you get to fly in a straight line.
Yeah, and you could if you think of you're talking about the future 20 years out, we might actually have optimized routes, as opposed to flying from like this to get to here. You might actually just fly from here to here, and that could save a considerable amount of time for the consumer, a considerable amount of fuel burn for the operators, a considerable amount of emissions for the environment. It's a very positive thing, and we've been working on it a long time. distressed that it's taken as long as it has, but we are making some progress, and I believe in the 20-year time frame you're talking about, we'll have a fairly modern air traffic control system.
Does that air traffic control system to you seem safer? And the only reason I ask is because ultimately that air traffic control system lets planes fly closer together. When you see that line coming into even Aspen or wherever, the planes seem relatively close to begin with. Once you get GPS going, the whole system becomes more efficient, but at the same time it's efficient because the planes can fly closer together. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think a modernized air traffic control system can be significantly safer. It relies less on human judgment. It relies much more on precision navigation. The R&P procedures which we have in some airports today that bring the that's required navigational performance, bring the aircraft into a very dense pipe with extreme precision is terrific. The equipment we have on aircraft today, like the 787, in terms of heads-up displays and the ability to land in weather where the visibility is much less, is much safer. So I think a modernized air traffic control system will absolutely enhance safety. Look, air travel is incredibly safe today. You know it and I know it. But we can always be safer, and I think a modern ATC system will help that.
While I was up here just now, my flight this afternoon from Denver to LaGuardia was canceled, United. I'm not joking. Literally, canceled. It just happened right now. I'm sorry to raise it. I love you. But
all I can say is I know they didn't actually text me to say, by the way, because I had to turn my cell phone off, that Andrew's flight is canceled.
You'll help me get home tonight.
But we've got a lot of weather on the East Coast, I know, because my device has been lighting up this morning with that.
Let me ask you a different question.
We'll get you there, though.
Thank you. I appreciate it. On Tuesday, right?
I'll tell you, though, if you got stranded, Aspen's not such a bad place.
Right, that's true. Absolutely. Absolutely. The Dreamliner, which has been in the news, you are the only airline in the United States currently flying that plane. There's been a number of issues, both with the battery, and now there's been a handful of other issues, whether it be a brake light or an oil issue.
Right.
It is a new plane, but how should everybody in this room feel about the next time they find out that they're flying from wherever, New York to LA or a longer flight to Japan, and it says on it, 787.
They should be thrilled because it's a terrific airplane. Look, that's an airplane that, it has, the current issues, the teething issues. The 777 had it, the 787 had it. They all have
People who
that.
are in the air don't like teething issues.
No, but they're not safety issues. They're reliability issues. They're maintenance reliability issues. And they're in some cases, there's code that gets generated that is a fault indication where there's no fault at all. But because it's a new aircraft, we make sure that we know what's going on. But the aircraft itself, it's pressurized to 6,000 feet. Most aircraft are pressurized to 8,000 feet, so you have more oxygen. It's humidified because it's not a metal tube. It's a carbon reinforced composite tube. It has much bigger windows. It has much bigger bins. You can put 4 rollerboards on board in one of the bins. It's got great design, terrific, modern. I really like them. Really cool touchless labs, all the kind of things that you want in modern air transport.
What's a touchless lab?
Well, I mean, basically, you don't have to handle anything. You really want to get into details in this?
Yeah.
Sure. You kind of wave your hand, and the toilet seat raises or sets and flushes, and you wave your hand, and the water comes out. You don't have to touch anything, right? Which is kind of nice.
Cool. Yeah.
I don't want to get too much in detail on that right up here, but it's a terrific airplane, and we have 65 of them on order. We operate 6 today, and we're blessed to be the launch customer. Sure, there's the pain of being the launch customer on the teething issues, but we have a significant competitive head start, and it's just a fantastic airplane.
Right. Help us think through a battery-powered plane. Do we think, is that, we were talking about energy before, is it possible that in, not 20 years clearly, because you got to amortize the planes you currently have, but in 30, 40, 50 years, we will have planes that are operated like a Tesla, only on a battery?
Well, you could have solar planes, just couldn't fly them at night. I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to consult with people who have much more knowledge about it. Batteries tend to be fairly heavy, and traditional hydrocarbons have an amazing amount of energy density for their weight. I suppose there's some theoretical possibility, but for commercial aviation, given the weight of the airframe with the passengers and the cargo, it seems improbable to me.
Okay. The other issue I want to touch on is safety. Not just safety in the air, but safety in terms of the process that we all go through, going through the line. I've told you I got pre-checked with the global entry. That's a good thing. What is it going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now, or even sooner? Is there ever going to be a day where I will literally just walk right through? And what are the airlines doing in terms of your relationship with the TSA and how you interrelate?
Well, I would say there's two pieces of that. Certainly from the part that we control, yes, absolutely. I mean, you think of the concept of a boarding pass, it's an odd thing to have at all, right? And of course you have to overcome issues either through RFID or biometrics, but having a boarding pass I think will go away. You can imagine a world where we will recognize you. It could be through facial recognition, it could be through four-finger geometry, it could be through fingerprints, iris scans, any number of biometrics, where we would recognize you, where you would everything would be pre-recognized. You would come in. If you were checking a bag, you'd simply put the tag on the bag itself, or have an RFID where you don't have to do that. You just put it on the belt and it goes on the airplane. And certainly at the gate, in terms of self-boarding gates and things that are, people have kiosks today. You see them all over. Well, that's old technology. Your kiosk is in your pocket today, right? Your kiosk is your smartphone. And so we'll migrate away from kiosks, and people will basically have control of their flights, in their own devices. In terms of things we don't control, like TSA and Department of Homeland Security, things like that, CBP, ICE, that's a different matter, because that's up against the government bureaucracy, and that's much more difficult to reform. Now, I will say, many people criticize the government. I've been sometimes accused of that from time to time, but there are some things our government does really well. They do make sure we're safe every day in the air, and that's an impressive achievement given the volume of air travel we have. Certainly the TSA under John Pistol with PreCheck is beginning to actually use a risk-based methodology for transportation security, and that's a good thing. And if those of you who have qualified for PreCheck, it's like the good old days. You just walk right through, and you can wear your coats, and you can wear your shoes, and you don't have to take your liquids out, and you don't have to take your computers out, and because you're not a risk. And our government is recognizing that. And global entry on reverse coming in, if you travel internationally, you have to be in global entry. You miss all the lines. You go to the kiosk, it takes you 60 seconds and you're through. Now, I think the success of those programs can breed success of other novel programs that we may not have thought of yet as a nation, or the government hasn't thought of in terms of security. Aviation security is important. We have historically been targets of terrorists, and we need to take that very seriously. But there may be advances in technology, of scanning technology, where the necessity to take off your shoes and take off your coat and take off your belt and take off your watch. And I was once behind actually one of our captains in the early days, and I was standing behind him. He took off his hat and he took off his belt and he took off his shoes and he took off his watch. And I tapped him on the shoulder and said, Captain, what do you think they're looking for? And without missing a beat, he said, Jeff, they're looking for something with which I can take control of the aircraft. So we have had a fairly curious policy in the past, but our government is moving in the right direction with things like PreCheck, with things like global entry, and I think advances in scanning technology, not only for us but also for bags, will improve the process over time, improve the flow, and I can see 20 years out that being materially improved.
Do you think the security system works? There was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about a year ago by, I think, one of the former heads of the TSA, who described it as security theater. That it wasn't security in reality, but that it was giving us all a great sense that there was security.
Well, there's lots of levels of security, and do I think the security works? Yes, absolutely, because you can fly safely every day without fear that there's going to be an issue. So I think it does work, and what you see as passengers isn't all the security that's there. There are many levels of security you don't see. And I'm not Edward Snowden, and I will not talk to you about it. But there are many levels of security, and I think the government does a good job of security. Yeah.
There are still marshals on all the planes, right?
I can't speak to where they are, but there are air marshals on board aircraft. Yes.
Okay. Another question that comes up all the time. My friend Tom Friedman, who was here, I don't know if he's still here, talks often about what it's like to go from the airport in Hong Kong in terms of infrastructure spending and to land at JFK, which often feels like a mess.
I'm glad that's another carrier's hub, not mine, but go ahead.
You guys don't land any planes at
we
JFK?
fly to JFK, but it's not a hub.
Newark is
Yeah,
Newark
right,
is your
that's right,
base.
That's right.
What is you talked about sort of subsidies, and you said you were sort of against government subsidies, but in terms of infrastructure spending, what the government can and should be doing, do you think they should be modernizing a JFK? Does that make sense in terms of how we spend our money as taxpayers?
Well, I think that our airports need to be competitive. Recognize that mostly we, the airlines, pay for all that stuff. People think that governments pay for it, but they don't. They sometimes are a financing vehicle, but we pay for it. And as a result, given how the U.S. Industry historically has been, which is serially bankrupt and basically selling its furniture to keep warm, the underlying infrastructure reflects that. I think as we have a healthier industry, that industry will be able to afford better airports, and it may well be an appropriate thing for government itself to directly invest in, finance, and pay for in terms of keeping the United States competitive, as any other infrastructure development in the United States would be. But large parts of those airports are paid for by us or indirectly by you through the taxation. And some of that taxation, as I said before, is completely appropriate.
So you've talked about taxation, you brought it up a handful of times. How much of the taxes that are a result of buying a plane ticket actually go back into some form of flying?
Well, I think that depends upon the tax.
Because you've argued so far that that's too much. So I
well,
want to try to understand what.
Well, there are portions. The problem is there's some degree of not only leakage and out of the system for non-aviation purposes, because we are viewed as piggy banks as airlines, and we have large cash flow, no profits historically, but large cash flow. And there are other aspects of it that are inappropriately allocated. For example, the airspace, and this is probably going to be somewhat controversial given this audience here in Aspen, but general aviation and private aviation does not pay its fair share of the cost of the air traffic control system. So it's a significant.
Explain that issue for those in the audience that don't understand, though there are some that probably do very well.
No, I think most people here do, would be my guess. We use only a portion of the airspace, but we as commercial airlines do, but we pay for the vast majority of its costs. Whereas general aviation and private jets use a pretty significant portion. I can't recollect what it is. I think it's 20 to 30%, and they pay a very, very tiny portion of the cost. And so there's both the allocation of the tax dollars in terms of who's paying it and who's benefiting from it, and the leakage from the system where, or in addition to that, there are taxes on us, and where similar taxes are not on industries that bring people in, for example, the cruise industry. So the taxes tend to be concentrated on us because we are excellent tax collectors. We are really, really good at tax collection for the government, and the government recognizes it, and it uses that sort of frictionless tax collection ability that the airlines provide to constantly up the taxes. And again, there's no way that the nation's air traffic control system needs an additional 25%, which is 5 percentage points more taxes. But the government needs money, and so we're the object of the hit.
Okay, final question. It's an investment question, then we'll open up to the audience and turn this into a conversation, which is this. I was at the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting maybe a month and a half ago, and Legg Mason's Bill Miller suggested that airlines, for the first time, could be great investments. He said he thought that they were like railroads, actually, and suggested that Warren Buffett should buy an airline. On the theory that now that there's been so much consolidation that it really is impossible, or at least very, very difficult for a competitor to come into the market. He said, like a railroad, there are literally only so many tracks, there are only so many landing slots, and now there's been so much consolidation. These airlines are now great investments. I'm assuming you agree with him, but I don't know if you agree with him for the same reasons, and I should tell you in advance that Warren Buffett didn't react.
He's probably back thinking about it, penciling through the numbers. Look, we have at United. We have the largest network in the world. It has a huge amount of scheduled utility and value, particularly for business travelers, and that is a terrific asset to have. And it is, I believe, a non-reproducible asset, and that has enormous value. I don't think it is true that there's no room for new airlines. I mean, there are airlines like Spirit, a very small, very successful airline. Now, Spirit chases a type of traveler that we do not chase.
So do you think you compete, for example, with a JetBlue anymore, or Spirit? Is JetBlue in that category? Is Virgin America in that category?
No, certainly Virgin America and JetBlue, we compete head to head. I would call them somewhat certainly JetBlue more established carriers.
Where's Southwest in that?
Well, Southwest has become a large, what we used to be called legacy carriers. It's become a legacy carrier. And in fact, Southwest acquired AirTran because it had pretty much Walmarted America and had no place to grow. And its cost of, it's no longer a low-cost carrier. Have we transformed the business through consolidation? Yes. Is that good for airlines? Yes. Is it good for consumers? Absolutely it is. Because you want us to be successful. You want us to buy the 787. You want us to invest in facilities. You want us to invest in customer service. You want us to invest in technology. The only way we can do that is if we're profitable. And we're in a position today where the U.S. airline business can be profitable, and I think profitable for the long run.
Okay, Jeff Smisek, thank you for that. Let's open it up to questions. Thank you very, very much. It was a great conversation. I'll be looking into my canceled flight while somebody asks a question.
Oh, trust me, someone's already looking into it.
You had your hand up with the mic there.
Thank you. I'm Tom Strauss from New York. I am traveling on United from San Francisco to Sydney Monday night, so this question should be a friendly one. Talk to us about baggage claim. I'm going to carry on my bags because it's all business and I don't want the risk of a lost bag. But with all the improvements of technology, what's the outlook for more rapid retrieval of bags, or is this just a function of outdated airports?
Well, it's a terrific question and an important one. It's a complex infrastructure with many people who control it. Certainly at airports that are not our hubs, it's out of our control entirely. Some of them are state-owned, some of them are privately owned. There's all different types of airports around the world. Some of them have different types of technology. Some of them are having more investments and less investments. And also recognize that there are security procedures that go with respect to a checked bag that you don't see, but in the US the TSA does and foreign governments do as well. So I think there's a lot of scope for improvement, and recognize as well that handling a bag is really complex because you're going from point A to point B, but many people are making connections, and aircraft are coming in with bags that are perhaps the bags inside the aircraft are going to 40 or 50 or 60 different places. Some of them are tight connections, what we call hot bags. Some of them are longer connections, and making sure that we can transfer those bags on board that aircraft and get it on time is Herculean. But there's a lot of room and scope for improvement, not only from a technology, but from an infrastructure perspective. Again, back to being profitable, and to your question, Andrew, on government's role in terms of providing the appropriate infrastructure for things like bag transfer.
Is there any airline that does bags terrifically well, where you say, either in the US or in Europe, where you say they've figured it out, or there's a technology?
No, there's no one. I mean, people have different mishandled bag rates. But I don't think anybody has cracked the code because you're so dependent on many destinations and people who you don't control. And so there's no magic, there's no silver bullet. There's continued attempts at improvement and there's continued investments, but no one's cracked the code.
Do you check your own bags?
It depends upon whether I'm traveling with my wife or not.
Okay.
She's in the audience. I'm going to pay for that remark, I can tell you.
Let's take some more questions from down here, if we could.
Jeff, Gordon Siegel from Chicago. You came out of Continental Airlines, and you've merged it with United. Continental service, especially out of Newark internationally, is fantastic and business first. It's really still way above United. The question we always have is, Jeff going to change United to be like Continental, or is Continental going to be absorbed into United? Both. I know you got a younger fleet at Continental, so that helps. But the crews are happier, the food is better. You fly out of Newark, it's a great business class experience versus flying out of Chicago to Europe, not as good a business class experience. Do you have a plan of how you're going to merge and finish merging these airlines as far as customer service is going to be held?
You bet. And in fact, we are, look, the airline business is a service business, and we need to have the service at United to be world-class service, and we're working on that. In any merger, the service suffers. It happened at Delta. It happened to us. It will happen at our friends at American US Airways. But the question is then how do you take that and take it to the level where you want it to be? And that's cultural, bringing two cultures together, which takes time and patience and work and a lot of communication and a lot of doing what you say you're going to do. For example, we're renovating break rooms. We're spending money renovating break rooms. Those are things you will never see, but our employees see every single day. We built a health center at O'Hare Airport where our coworkers can go and be treated for free at the airport. That's good for them and good for us. It's actually operated by our friends at Walgreens, another fine Chicago firm. We've invested an enormous amount in technology, front-end technology for our coworkers. We've invested in training for them. We're training 48,000 people across the system. Every agent on the ground, every reservations agent, every flight attendant, including those with our express partners in customer service. We have an incentive program based on our customer satisfaction metrics, which, by the way, are improving significantly. We've got the metrics to show that we're improving the service. And lastly, the piece that we haven't done historically is making sure we hold our people accountable for it. And starting at the end of this year, we're going to have, I don't know what you would call it, sort of the mystery shopper experience across the system, in the air and on the ground. And we're going to use that for continuous improvement to find out where we're not living up to where we should be and improving it. But we're very focused on it because you said the food is better on Continental. It's the same food, okay? And the interesting thing about what you said is our highest customer satisfaction scores are on the 787. Now, those happen to be operated by a Continental crew. They're fine, good people who do a good job. But when you're on, if your flight's on time and you're on a modern, clean airplane and you get great customer service, guess what? The food's better, the seat's wider, the lights are brighter. I mean, you just feel better. It's true. And so what you're experiencing is what you're saying is incredibly important to me because one of my big goals is to make sure that we have an airline where we're really proud of the service. And essentially it's when your coworkers are proud of where they work and they trust each other and they trust management and they want to do a good job, not because I'm lecturing them and telling them to, because they want to do a good job, they're going to give great service. And when they do, you'll come back. And when you come back, we'll make money. And that's a virtuous cycle that we can keep going through. So very focused on it. In a merger, it's tough, it takes time. But our customer satisfaction metrics today are much higher than they were a year ago. That's not saying much because a year ago they were pretty low. But we are improving every day, and we'll continue to focus on that because we know how important customer service is.
Okay, why don't we go right there? We'll
Hi, my name is Kevin McDonald, and I'm a customer service agent at Skywest, which is a regional carrier for United. And just want to say, Andrew, I'm your man. So I'll be helping you get out of here today.
I appreciate that.
No worry.
Thank you very much.
The question is, as a regional carrier, Skywest, I mean, we're all about service, all about customer service. So, Mr. Smisek, if you can explain to the audience and to us about how, with going more for the regional carriers for the non-hub destinations, how will that evolve over the next 10 years?
Well, it's a good question, and we need to rely on regional partners for destinations either we can't serve with mainline aircraft or there are time channels during the day where a regional aircraft makes sense, where there isn't the demand during that time channel. There's demand for mainline aircraft at certain times of day, particularly when business people are traveling, and other times during the day which are less attractive to the business traveler, where we'll have more leisure travel, where the demand is lower, and we have to right-size the airplane for it. In terms of the mix between the mainline fleet and the regional fleet, that's going to essentially vary by location, by demand, by fuel prices, and lots of other things. It's very hard for me to predict that. It is important, though, that the service level at our Skywest partner or any of our other regional partners is as good as it can be, and because our customers don't really distinguish between a United Express aircraft and a United aircraft. They're different companies, different crews, we don't control them, and yet we have to make sure we have a consistent level of service to satisfy our customers. And by the way, I appreciate the good work that you're doing. Skywest does a terrific job for us.
Great. Thank you for that question. Why don't we get to this side, because I feel like I've been, ma'am? Great.
Thank you. Hi, Leisha John, Ernst & Young Environmental Sustainability. I would love to hear your thoughts about biofuels, maybe algae.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say that I think the U.S. has done the U.S. airlines have done a fairly good job in improving their fuel efficiency. That's largely been by necessity, the higher price of fuel. But for example, United, we're 32% more fuel efficient than we were in 1994. So that's a significant improvement. And we continue to be more efficient by new airframes, more efficient engine, winglets, you've seen them, and single engine taxi outs, engine washes, all the things we do every day, using ground-based electricity instead of running the auxiliary power unit in the tail, which burns jet fuel and pollutes as well, right? In terms of biofuels, we've been one of the early leaders at United. We actually flew the first U.S. commercial flight using biofuels. And we're a big proponent of biofuels. The issue with biofuels today is not that they don't work. They work perfectly well. They're drop-in fuels. They're a perfect substitute. The problem is cost. And they're about 5 times as expensive per gallon. And we burn a lot of jet fuel. And as a result, biofuels to be successful have to be saleable, that's the right price, and scalable. They have to be saleable, they have to be reasonably priced with hydrocarbons, and they have to be produced in a scale sufficient that it makes sense for us. And we're committed to it. We've spent a lot of money on it. In fact, we recently announced a deal with 15 million gallons of biofuel at LAX, at LA Airport, with a manufacturer there. But I think it will take time, and I think that's an investment. We're talking about government subsidies, an investment by our government to further biofuels, to make them both saleable and scalable, to advance the technology, and to experiment with many different feedstocks, particularly feedstocks that don't affect the price of commodities that the world uses to feed itself. I think that's really important, and also just in terms of our own energy independence and security issues in the United States. I mean, that's a really important thing for our government to invest in, and I would really support it.
Okay, why don't we go in the back there? There's a fellow there with his hand up. Thanks.
Hi, Gary White with water.org. Running a nonprofit organization, obviously we fly economy, and I fly globally a lot. So what kind of user experiences do we have to look forward to in the back of the plane over the coming years?
Well, what you have in the back of the plane is we have Economy Plus, which is more room. Great product, by the way. I suggest you try it. It's not that much more expensive than Coach. And you'll have all the same kind of communications that you'll have in the front in terms of global satellite-based Wi-Fi on United. We'll put streaming video on board our airplanes as well, so you can bring your own devices. We'll put power so that you won't run out of batteries, right, on it. In terms of things like free food, remember the airlines used to give free food in Coach? Well, the problem is people wouldn't pay for that. And we'll provide the level of service and amenities that customers want and will pay for, which is why we fractured the product and unbundled it, so we can give consumers choice of the things that they want to use and pay for, and not have to, in effect, subsidize things that they don't want and don't want to pay for. But all of our customers are important to us, and we want to make the Coach area of our airplane as comfortable and as good an experience as we can, given what consumers are willing to pay for.
On the consumer side, by the way, is it ever going to be easier to use my miles to buy tickets?
Well, look.
It's very difficult.
On us, we're the #1 airline in terms of redemption of miles and the use and usability of miles. So we're the best. So you're talking to the best right here. But the answer is, of course. And we want our miles to be to have a high amount of utility. We want lots of ways. In fact, we offer many ways to earn miles and many ways to redeem miles. Now, most people want to redeem them on air travel, but we offer many other ways to redeem them. We want that currency to be ubiquitous, and we want it to have huge utility because it's a really valuable program for us. It's a good profit margin for us, and a business that historically has had a low profit margin. So, we don't want it to be difficult. Now, we do allocate.
How many seats are allocated?
Well, it's a fun because it's an economic formula, and we've got a bunch of sophisticated folks and algorithms to determine it. But every seat is priced, and the miles are priced, and they're priced competitively with cash. And it depends upon which bucket they're in and whether that bucket is open and closed. You know how sophisticated airline revenue management is. But we want people to be able to redeem, and I'm not just talking from what we want, what we actually do. If you take a look at the Mileage Plus program, it's #1 in the US.
Okay. Let's take a question in the back there, right there, with the hat.
Hello, Dan Sperling, University of California, Davis, and to give me a little more credibility, a 2 million miler with United.
Wow.
My kind of guy.
And I've redeemed almost all of those miles for tickets, I would
Wow.
say.
So there, Andrew. Thank you.
He's a plant.
That's the warm-up. So the question is, do you think climate change is a major threat? And if so, why did your industry, the US industry, team up with the Chinese government to oppose the European climate policies?
I think climate change is a significant issue, and I think that that's one of the, we are becoming far more fuel efficient for economic reasons, but for climate change to be, for response to climate change to be durable, they need to be grounded in sound economics. The reason that we opposed the European trading scheme, which is what you're talking about, was it was a patchwork. That is, if you have Europe determine the level of taxation or emissions trading or whatever it may be, then the next thing, Australia comes up with its, and Argentina comes up with its idea, and Uruguay comes up with its idea, and Canada, and you have this patchwork, and we're global, and we have to have a set of global standards. We're not opposed to the regulation of our emissions, or not opposed to the taxation of our emissions. I think that's a rational thing. But it has to be global. It has to be one set of rules for global airlines, which is why we've gotten together as airlines through the United States and through IATA, through the United Nations organization ICAO, to propose a global set of standards on our emissions, so that we can have a rational, thoughtful, non-piecemeal approach to the regulation of our emissions.
All the way in the back, you deserve a question.
Thank you. Brent Gardner-Smith from Aspen. When there's competition in the Aspen market, prices drop. When you have a monopoly situation, prices rise. Is there any hope that that will ever change?
Well, I think you're probably talking of the laws of economics in terms of both supply and demand. This is and remains, even post-consolidation, a brutally competitive business. It always has been a brutally competitive business. Airlines have not lost huge amounts of money because it was an easy, regulated business. I mean, it wasn't before 1978, and airlines made money because they were pretty much guaranteed a return. It will always be a competitive business. Now, some markets can support multiple carriers, some markets not so much. Everybody looks at the world through their own knothole, and everybody wants more service, and everybody wants bigger service. But it's all, we don't create demand, we simply serve it. And to the extent there's sufficient demand for us to fly to Aspen, we'll do it. And if it isn't sufficient demand, we won't. And it's a tough message for communities sometimes, but it's just the laws of basic economics, what all of us deal with every day in our lives.
You've had your hand up for a while. Can we get a mic to him? Yes, sir.
Gideon Stein, I'm CEO of Lightsail Education. I talked to you the other day about 1K and global services. I see that you made some changes to the frequent flyer program to require revenue spending now. Are the frequent flyer programs going to improve because of this?
Well, I think so. I mean, the frequent flyer programs have a long history and actually haven't evolved much over the years. And they've been mileage based. And so today, if you think about it, we treat somebody who flies a lot of times between New York and Florida on a really cheap fare, a $79 fare, $89 fare, whatever it may be, the same as we treat a business traveler who flies us up front 4 times a year from Newark to Shanghai. That doesn't make any sense at all because those two customers are not equally valuable to us. One of them is basically fuel burn, and the other one is actually profitable. And so I think that the programs, I can't talk to the future and I won't talk to the future, but I will tell you that I think you've seen our program begin to develop into a better stratification of our flyers to recognize the value that they bring to the airline, and therefore to allocate to them the benefits of elite status, and not have to have those benefits in effect spread too thinly and subsidize it to others who don't actually deserve to get those benefits. So what we're trying to do is to get improved, enhanced, better benefits for our elites by defining the elites by value. That's what we'll do. Now, this program doesn't take effect. We start measuring in 2014, doesn't take effect 2015. So plenty of lead time and plenty of notice to our customers. But those dollar limits that we've put in are actually fairly low and fairly easy to achieve. And I can't talk to the future, but that kind of revenue-based stratification makes a lot more sense than a miles-based stratification.
Okay, we have 2 more minutes, so let's sneak 2 sort of rapid-fire questions in, sort of 30-second answers if we could. Ma'am, you've had your hand up for a while. You could stand up and scream the question, since I know they're going to kick us out of here sooner or later.
Susan Morrison, Chicago.
Hi.
Our daughter was at LaGuardia last night, and she had a flight that was canceled, and they said it was air traffic control, and the next flight she was moved to was 2.5 hours late, which was also air traffic control. I told her it was not United's fault, it was the sequester. Is that possible, or is that shorthand for other problems?
No, I don't think so. Look, I mean, you can have adverse weather and ground delay or flow control programs at airports, as we have along the East Coast. The East Coast is very crowded airspace, and is very difficult to operate in. And we have a large presence there, as some of our competitors, American and Delta, do as well. You can have significant delays caused by weather, caused by the air traffic control system, which has not been modernized and could be much more efficient than it is today, and could minimize those delays in the future. But we don't have that. We don't have that technology yet. I don't think that has anything to do with the sequester now.
Okay, final, all the way in the back. Yes, sir. You've had your hand up for a long time. Yep.
I'm a disabled passenger, and United has a policy with Economy Plus. If you buy an economy seat, the bulkhead's never available. You have generally good disability policies on United. However, your seating computer system will block out those seats, and at any point where a disabled passenger can't get those bulkhead seats. Any hope for that in the future?
Well, I don't know the answer to your question in terms of whether there's a change brewing in the future. We have changed when we adopted, Continental didn't have Economy Plus, and we've adopted it as we brought together with United. As we've done that, we have revenue managed those seats, and the bulkhead seats are very valued by customers. And in terms of whether or not, are you talking about for free, or are you talking about just having anybody with a customer with disability in those seats?
Hello. No,
Yeah.
They're just not available. They've already been taken or they're blocked. I'm Premier Plus, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But they're just not available, and therefore, someone like me either has to use a service, an aisle chair or something else when the bulkhead, is just not held in the system.
I don't know the answer to your question, but
Sure.
I can check, and we'll get someone to get back to you
Great.
afterwards. I've got someone here, we can get your name. Thanks.
Okay. Jeff Smisek, thank you you took all covers. You did it beautifully. You flew here on United.
Thanks.
I'll be flying back on United.
glad to
Hopefully
hear
get it home. And thank you for some great questions, everybody.
All right, thanks.